Welcome to the second in our series of webinars going over opportunities and requirements for early learning in the Every Student Succeeds Act. We're very excited to have with us Danielle Ewen from EducationCounsel, and she's going to highlight what is available in the legislation for districts. Thanks, Danielle.
Thanks, Tracy, and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the new education law, the Every Student Succeeds Act, how it relates to early childhood, and as district leaders, what's possible to do in your community to expand access to high quality experiences for children from birth through third grade. So you're going to see on the next slide that there was a very large change in the implementation of the law from the previous law. The biggest shift in the Every Student Succeeds Act is that it allows states to design the appropriate system for the children in their state. And in many cases, states have devolved that decision-making authority down to districts. So districts will have a lot of opportunities to think about what will work for their schools and their students and to implement new interventions that will best meet those needs. We hope that in many districts, one of those interventions will be high-quality early childhood in a variety of ways, and I'm going to talk about that. Right now, ESSA is still fairly new. It's been in place since December of 2015. States just finished writing their plans for implementation and are now asking districts to think about that. But what the law means and how it impacts communities will play out over the next few years and will continue to change over time, partially because implementing a law takes time, but also because a basic tenet of the new law is encouraging states and districts to do continuous improvement, to implement interventions that might work, to collect data and information on those interventions, and then to change what they're doing if it doesn't work or to make it more widely available when it is successful. And so we will see lots of changes over the next few years. For early childhood folks who are looking to better connect, go back a second, Tracy. For early childhood folks who are looking to better connect with their district and state agencies, there are lots of opportunities in the law that we're going to talk about. But because early childhood is not a requirement in the law, but simply referenced over and over throughout the law, those opportunities will require real intentionality by early childhood folks at the community level, accountability people, principals, district leaders, Title I leaders, and others to really think about how we can connect the two systems to improve outcomes for young kids. Go ahead and go to the next one. One of the great things about the law is that it continues the flexibility for uses of Title I to support early childhood. And I wanted to talk about this early on because there are some misconceptions about what we can do with Title I when it comes to early childhood at the local level. It's important to remember that Title I funds can be used by districts to create whatever kind of a program works for their community, whether it's district-wide, school-wide, or in targeted programs. That Title I funds can be used to serve children from birth through the age of free education, whether that's kindergarten or first grade, and that those programs must meet certain requirements, but can be available at the school level or in partner agencies. And if you look at the next slide, you can see some of the very specific ways that districts and communities have used Title I funds. And I put this up on the slide to give you a sense of all the different ways that Title I and ESSA can be used to support the broader needs of a community as it looks at its early childhood students and what they might need to be successful. So you can see that, as many of us know, Title I funds can be used for instructional programs, to serve pre-kindergartners, to serve younger children, that the funds can be used to pay for salaries of teachers in those programs. We can use the funds for home visiting to really make sure that children get a strong start, that parents have access to supports and resources that they need. We can provide professional development for early childhood providers in the community and to do joint professional development with those providers and teachers. And I'm going to talk more about that as we get into the structure of ESSA. Title I can provide support services, including nutrition, vision, and dental assessments, as well as counseling services for children who might need it. The Title I can also be used for screening and diagnostic assessment, which, as we know, can be a big need in many communities as children are entering kindergarten. And finally, Title I funds can be used both for summer programs and for transition programs. And I'm going to talk a lot about that as we move through the requirements of the law. So if you can go to the next slide, I'm going to talk about the very specific early learning requirements in the Every Student Succeeds Act to give you a sense of what districts must do and what they can do to really make your community stronger as it supports young children. So in the next slide, you can see that there are some requirements. I'm going to talk about some of them through the rest of my presentation. I strongly urge you to take a look at the document referenced here on the screen. The non-regulatory guidance on early learning in the Every Student Succeeds Act was put out by the Federal Department of Education in 2016. It has a lot of great ideas about how districts can support early childhood, and again, I'm going to talk about some of those. But it also has this great chart at the back that I've summarized here on the right-hand side of the slide that goes through different requirements for states and for districts as they're thinking about their obligations in supporting early learning in their implementation plan. So you can see a couple here on the slide of what the state has to do. As we go through, I'm going to talk about what some of the districts have to do. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll start that part of the conversation. So first, the law emphasizes coordination between and across different parts of the system. States have to talk about how they're going to support LEAs and individual schools that use their funds to support early learning programs, whether that's through guidance or technical assistance. This provides an opportunity to better serve communities by helping districts reach out to the different early childhood providers in their community. And if you don't know as a district leader who the early childhood providers are in your community, one of the best first steps you can take is to identify those folks, and you can ask your state education agency for a list of the providers in your community, where kids are coming from, so that you can start to be part of a plan that can better support young kids. If you go to the next slide, you can see that the law also talks about coordination requirements around transition, that transition is a high priority in the law. The law does not define transition, but we know from research and from implementation of Head Start programs that high quality transitions between early childhood services and education, elementary classrooms, really involve a lot of communication between different providers. Often includes the sharing of information about children, data, it includes joint professional development, and it really includes understanding the expectations on both sides of what children have experienced and know and are able to do as they go through early childhood programs and into the schools. And Title I funds can be used to support those transitions. It turns out that Head Start is, that local districts are required to coordinate with Head Start, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But again, thinking about coordination as a core component of planning for how to include early childhood in the district plan for ESSA can be a huge opportunity to better serve young children and their families. It can be a way to analyze what's in the community, to know where the gaps are, know where the strengths are, and to really work with community providers and others to address those gaps and to leverage those strengths in ways that may be more effective for the community. So if you go to the next slide, you can see that there are other requirements. As I mentioned, local districts are required to coordinate with Head Start in their communities. And this chart that is on the right-hand side of the slide is from that non-regulatory guidance that I referenced earlier, and you can see that it goes through the very specific requirements of Head Start and LEA coordination. LEAs must write a memorandum of understanding with their Head Start to do some of the transition and coordination activities that are identified on the slide. However, that should just be a first step, that once an LEA has reached out to its Head Start providers, that's an opportunity to then work with other community providers to develop the same kinds of same kinds of agreements around data sharing, around joint professional development, and to really expand the availability of high quality services for children from birth through the age of kindergarten entry. So coordination, you can see, because of the amount of time that I've spent and the number of slides, is a really big part of what ESSA is designed to do. It can be done in different ways, depending on who the players are. It can be done with through different auspices, whether it's through the MOA, the Memorandum of Agreement with Head Start, or through other mechanisms. But it should be the very first step as your district is thinking about how to improve the quality of early learning opportunities in the community. Because without that coordination, without working with those folks that are already in the community, we may not make good decisions about the best way to spend funds. By starting with coordination, by starting with creating and improving those relationships, we can really think about the best ways to use Title I and other funds to increase the quality of services that are available. So if you go to the next slide, we can talk about some of the other requirements around ESSA and early learning that are in the law. One of the other big ones that states and communities are starting to think about is a requirement in the law that says that both the state education agency and local education agencies must report on the number and percent of children enrolled in preschool programs. This is non-negotiable. It is a requirement. Your state will help you understand how you're going to report that. It is based on data that is currently reported by schools to the Office of Civil Rights in the Federal Department of Education. It is an important marker of what is available in the community, and it's an opportunity as a school district to really think about which children are served and where they're served. While the data point itself doesn't get into quality or the various ages of children, it is an opportunity for district leaders and their community partners to think about the kind of data you already have on where children are served and how they're served, and to really gather that data in more intentional ways, to use that data to think about coordination and how to increase the number of slots available in a community, and also to better identify where children are to direct other interventions and support services to them. So while the requirement is on the number and percent of preschool children served, the opportunity it presents as a tool to building a better system for kids can be enormous in many communities, especially where that data analysis isn't currently being done. So we go to the next slide. You can see that there are other requirements. We go to the next slide, thank you, especially at the local level. So I've been talking a little bit about opportunities at the state level. I've talked about some of the requirements for LEAs. But once an LEA makes the active decision to provide early childhood services, whether it's home visiting, it's supporting joint professional development or other things, the district has to be really clear in their plan about how they're going to support, coordinate, and integrate those services with the other parts of the community, as we've been talking about, that coordination piece. The law also states that when a local agency delivers early childhood services through Title I, that those activities must meet the Head Start standards as outlined in the Head Start Early Childhood Outcomes Framework. This is not something that should be seen as a barrier. This is not saying that every program has to meet the several hundred pages that are in the performance standards. What the law actually is alluding to, and what the guidance discusses, is that the Head Start standards around education must be followed, and they are a great opportunity to think about the quality of the services that are available, because they are about making sure that the program has a research-based curriculum, that parent engagement is a core component, that there is an assessment structure in place for those children, and that that stakeholders are involved in the design of the program. So really understanding what the Head Start performance standards are in this area, and using those again as an opportunity to think about coordination of services and the quality of what's available to young kids is an opportunity as laid out through the requirement in the law. If you can go to the next slide, I will keep talking about some of those requirements. Throughout the law, professional development is a huge part of the interventions that are thought about to improve the quality of teaching and learning across the grades. This is particularly true for young kids, and the law actually emphasizes that. Both Titles I, II, and III talk about using funds to support high-quality professional development at every level, and they talk about in each section including early childhood providers in the professional development that the district provides, which in many communities is going to be a change. One of the great things that the law did was it expanded the definition of professional learning. It promotes joint professional development across early childhood and schools, and it talks about the need to have professional development that focuses on transition and, as you can see on the slide, on, quote, issues related to school readiness and other content designed to meet the needs of students through age 8. As I said, we see this as a huge change and a positive one in the law, because we hope it will help districts think about how to focus their professional development resources on the needs of children before 3rd grade, an area where many of our school leaders, teachers, and others in the community have not had a lot of exposure. They've not had a lot of training in those areas. And because the law talks about the opportunity to do joint professional development with the early childhood community. The opportunity here to use resources for professional learning to expand understanding of the needs of kids between and across the two systems is enormous and provides another real opportunity to improve quality for the children in every program in the community. The law, as I said, talks about the need to expand understanding of child development. It is less specific about other ways to use the professional development dollars to support early learning between birth and third grade. But many districts are looking at ways to improve the quality of teaching and the organization of classrooms across those grades, and are thinking about how to improve instructional practices to be more reflective of developmentally appropriate practice, to be better organized to support small group learning. Many districts are thinking about using coaching and mentoring as well as peer-to-peer modeling for early childhood and early elementary classrooms, and bringing together folks from community providers, from Head Start and other childcare agencies with kindergarten, first and second grade teachers to think about what good quality classrooms look like, and together to design those experiences for young children to be reflective of their needs and to create a real continuum of quality for kids between and across the two settings. If you can go to the next slide, you can also see that this provides the opportunity to elevate professional development and also to leverage resources between the two systems in order to encourage the professionalization of the early childhood workforce, and also to create better and more meaningful expectations between early elementary school classrooms and those in the community serving young kids. We can go to the next slide. This is an important area of the law that many folks in the early childhood community are less familiar with. Much of ESSA is focused on accountability and on making sure that schools in the bottom 5% and those schools that are serving particular subgroups of children in ways that are not meeting graduation rates and other requirements for those kids, that those schools in the bottom 5% get additional supports through something called school improvement. And many of you are probably thinking in your districts about how to use school improvement dollars, how to design school improvement strategies to really be supportive of children and families in those classrooms. What we hope is that districts who have elementary schools that are in school improvement will recognize the need to think about early childhood as a core component of your school improvement strategy. When schools are put into improvement, the local education agency must do a needs assessment. In North Carolina, we are hoping that that will include a landscape analysis of the early childhood opportunities available to children in the community. What do we mean by that? We mean that in thinking about the needs of the school, in thinking about the root causes that have led to putting the school into the school improvement category, that the school and the district will think about where children experience early childhood, the quality of those programs, the demographics of the community, the opportunities to be in high quality settings for different groups of children across race and income groups, the availability of other supports, including libraries, including access to medical care so that children have the kinds of screenings that they need to make sure that they're healthy, that all of that can and should be part of the needs assessment strategy used as schools go into improvement. And then as schools are in improvement, designing their plans, really thinking about what the early childhood gaps are in a community and how addressing those gaps can be a part of the school improvement strategy, whether that is creating more pre-K classrooms as part of school improvement, partnering with community providers to create stronger birth to 5 programs to serve children at younger ages and ensure they're getting what they need, to provide home visiting, as we talked about earlier, or to do other supports in the community to make sure that children are entering school with what they need to be successful as the school is changing its approach to teaching and learning. The needs assessment and other strategies in school improvement can also be used to identify wraparound supports for young children, whether it's summer learning, before and after school, or things like developmental screenings and nutrition and transportation services. So again, as schools in your community are entering school improvement, as a district thinking about the role of early childhood to increase the quality of those schools and to make sure that children are as ready as possible before they walk through the school door. So going to the next slide, these are just a couple of examples of what different districts have done, different communities have done to integrate early childhood into their implementation of the federal law. In some cases, they are district-wide. In some cases, they are school-focused. And as you can see, looking at the slide, there are a variety of approaches. Davenport, Iowa created an approach that was Birth to 5, where the local district actually put money into early childhood learning centers to make sure there were opportunities available. Melrose, Massachusetts went in a whole different direction, and they identified a lack of developmental screenings in their community as one of their biggest concerns, because children were coming in unidentified. There were delays in getting them identified for early intervention if they needed them, and that was adding to the burdens that those children already had in being able to reach their full potential. And so the district came together and said, what we really need is to make sure that every 4-year-old has had a comprehensive developmental screening before they walk through our school door for kindergarten. And they were able to change their approaches in that way. In Gwinnett County, the first bullet on the slide, they took yet a different approach. And they said, our biggest issue is that our families are walking through the door when they come to kindergarten with very little understanding of the kindergarten experience. And we don't know where they've been. We don't know what they've experienced. We don't know what they have had in terms of pre-literacy, pre-math, what their social emotional supports have been. And so the district put transition teams into all of their elementary schools and identified a transition specialist to work across the district whose primary job was really to facilitate those relationships with the early childhood community to help families access and understand the kindergarten experience well before they walked into the school building, and to make sure that as much information was available as possible about those children and their families and for their children and their families. And together that created relationships that really improved the quality of what children were experiencing. And finally, the last bullet is about the Chicago Child Parent Centers, which many of you may be familiar with, which provided comprehensive educational and family support services to low-income children from birth through 3rd grade at their high poverty sites. They use their Title I funds to provide all of those direct educational services, including family engagement, as well as professional development that focused on developmentally appropriate practice, about classroom organization, about social emotional supports for families. And so they took a more comprehensive approach to creating early childhood experiences for their kids. But I put these examples on the slide to show you that as you are sitting down and thinking about what your community wants to do as it's writing its district plan, and what the role of early learning is in improving the quality of what is available to children as early as possible and as they enter the school building, there are a lot of different ways to do that. There are a lot of ways to leverage existing resources in the community through coordination, better transitions, joint professional development. There are many ways to leverage existing resources in the community through subsidy, through pre-K, through family engagement, to make sure that as many families as possible have high quality opportunities. And so if you go to the next slide, what we have here and what will be available to you as you're thinking about these processes are just a set of questions that are sort of organized around the way that the federal law prioritizes different interventions. And so the law talks about accountability, school improvement, assessment and standards, and whether all students are college and career ready. And in each of those buckets, there are questions around early learning. There are questions about what we can do to better support children from birth to 3rd grade that you might want to consider as your district is thinking about its district level plan. And there are ways to include different measures, whether it's about chronic absenteeism, about suspension expulsion, as you're thinking about your local accountability measures. There are ways to evaluate the kinds of interventions that will be put in place for school improvement, as we've talked about. There are different ways to think about the standards that need to be in place, including the Head Start standards, thinking about social emotional supports for young children. And finally, there are ways to think about using the professional development funds that we've talked about to really support a high quality experience from birth to 3rd grade for children, their families, and for the caregivers, teachers, and others who are working with them across the continuum of years. So I encourage you to look at these questions. I encourage you to think about how they can be part of your plan. And I encourage you to really think about how everything from coordination, transition, professional development, and school improvement can support the growth of a high-quality early childhood system in your community as you're writing your district ESSA plan. So I'm going to stop there and turn it back over to you, Tracy.
Thank you so much, Danielle. And we will have 2 other modules available on this issue.